As the People versus O.J. Simpson continues, the defense is making a strong case that the LAPD framed their client for the murders of Nicole Brown and Ron Goldman. They set out to prove drops of blood were planted at the two crime scenes. I'm Roger Cossack, and this is OJ25.
All right, Mr. Cochran, have you confirmed the availability of your next witness?
Yes, Don Thompson, Your Honor, LAPD officer. Good afternoon, Officer Thompson. How are you?
I'm doing very well.
I'd like to direct your attention, sir, back to the date of June 13th, 1994. At sometime on that date, in and around the noonday hour, were you assigned to 360 Rockingham, city of Los Angeles, Brentwood, California?
Yes, I was.
And at some time around noon or thereabouts, did you have occasion to see Mr. O.J. Simpson at that location?
Yes, I did.
Prior to your seeing Mr. Simpson there, had you had a conversation with a detective by the name of Van Adder?
Yes, I did.
And did Detective Van Adder give you some instructions with regard to what to do when you saw Mr. Simpson arrive at the location?
Yes, he did.
What did he tell you to do?
He told me to place the defendant in handcuffs as soon as he arrived.
He went directly to his home on Rockingham, where he was first of all placed in handcuffs, then they were taken off, and then was asked if he wanted to come downtown and talk to the police. Maybe not asked, told. So you come downtown and talk to the detectives in this case, Van Adder, Lang. Do you recognize that gentleman in the white shirt?
Yes, I do.
And who is that?
That's Mr. Simpson.
When he returned from Chicago after the murders, he was briefly handcuffed when he was talking to police, and there happened to be a camera crew that captured that scene.
How long would you say he had been back home on his premises to the time he's handcuffed in that condition?
I would say about a little over 30 seconds.
About 30 seconds?
Maybe a little longer, 45 seconds.
The image of O.J. Simpson being handcuffed, it's a really powerful image. To see somebody handcuffed implies guilt.
Detective Van Adder didn't use the word arrest, did he?
No, he didn't.
He didn't say we're going to take him to jail, did he?
No, he didn't.
He didn't say we're going to charge him with murder, did he?
No, he didn't.
Officer Thompson is uncomfortable. Typically, a police officer is called by the prosecution, it's mapped out, you just say this. This is a very different case. He's a defense witness, and you can see how uncomfortable he is as the defense tries to use him to pull anything they can out of him. The prosecution, on the other hand, is also trying to use him to push the narrative that there's nothing here, there is no rush to judgment, this is all nonsense. But talk about an uncomfortable witness, it's Officer Thompson.
When you saw him, did he appear to you to be in an agitated state or an upset state? Let me concentrate here. Can you describe how Mr. Simpson appeared when you first saw him around noon on June 13th?
Yes. He seemed to be in a hurried state.
Remember that you and I had a conversation yesterday in this courtroom?
Yes.
And at that time, I asked you about how Mr. Simpson appeared, and you recall indicating to me that he seemed to you to be agitated when you first saw him?
I don't remember using the words agitated, but he did seem to be in a hurry.
You don't recall using the word agitated with me yesterday?
I may have used that word, but I don't recall right now.
Would that somewhat fit it?
Somewhat.
All right.
As he walked up that driveway, he wasn't crying, was he?
No, he wasn't.
He didn't appear despondent, did he?
He didn't seem that way to me.
In fact, he had a blank, hurried look about his face, didn't he?
First question.
Did he have a blank look about him?
Somewhat, yes.
Now, officer, you see Mr. Simpson walking down the driveway.
Yes, I do.
Is that the appropriate manner in which a police officer should walk with someone who's been arrested on 2 counts of murder?
No, it is not.
Had the defendant been under arrest at that point, he would have been walking ahead of Detective Van Adder. Is that correct?
Yes, he would have.
That would be proper procedure, right?
It would have been good officer safety and good common sense.
You saw him come out of the driveway and get into this car with some police officers, and you saw them leave the scene. Isn't that right, sir?
Yes.
And Mr. Simpson was in the company of these 2 police officers, wasn't he?
If that was Detective Van Adder driving the car away, yes.
All right. You didn't see Mr. Simpson drive off in a Bentley, did you, sir?
No.
You didn't see him drive off in any car in that driveway, did you, sir?
No.
But you've arrested people and placed them inside your vehicle before, correct?
Yes.
And typically, don't you sort of put your hand on top of their head and help them into the back of the vehicle?
Yes, I make sure they don't hit their head when they enter.
Nobody did that in this case, did they?
No.
Now, normally when you as a police officer transport someone who's been arrested for murder, don't you transport them in a vehicle that has some type of protection between the front seat and the back seat?
Petitioning, yes.
You didn't see that in this car, did you? In Detective Van Adder's car?
No.
That's not good officer safety when you're in a situation where you're transporting someone under arrest for murder, is it?
No.
Have you ever seen anyone arrested for murder?
Yes.
And on those occasions, do you ever see anybody get treated any better than the way Mr. Simpson was treated at that time by Detective Van Adder?
I've never seen a person arrested for murder treated in the way I saw this on the video. No.
That's not what you were taught in the academy, is it?
No.
The following program contains graphic images. Viewer discretion is advised.
All right, the records reflect the jury has withdrawn from the courtroom. All right, Mr. Darden, what is your contemplated cross-examination of Officer Thompson at this point? That he was at Bundy, that he was aware of the crime scene issues?
Yes.
He was aware of the blood at the Rockingham address, and based upon that, he saw no reason to disagree with Detective Van Adder's determination to hook up Mr. Simpson?
Yes.
I could do that in 3 questions.
Well, it'd be more dramatic if we did it in 15, Your Honor.
But we're not here for drama, are we, Mr. Darden?
Well, I'm not anymore. But, also, I think it's important.
That wasn't an appropriate comment, Mr. Cochran. That was a cheap shot.
I'm sorry, did Mr. Cochran apologize?
Not yet, but he will.
Classic moment where Johnny Cochran just digs Christopher Darden, bringing up the glove during another argument. Darden doesn't even hear it, but Judge Ito hears it and calls out Cochran and says, whoa, that's a cheap shot, of course. Now you've got fireworks. And this, more than anything, post-glove, it's an example of the tension, the dislike that Johnny Cochran and Chris Darden have for each other. It's palpable.
I'm just telling Mr. Cochran I don't want to hear his mouth this afternoon.
All I sought to bring out was what the facts were.
And he's been mouthing off for the past 12 months.
And as usual, they're trying to give a soundbite.
Put up or shut up.
We've heard this for 6 months.
Nobody calls us the dream team, Mr. Cochran.
I'm so mad at both of you guys. I'm about to hold both of you in contempt.
Before going over to Rockingham, you went over to Bundy that morning, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
You arrived at Bundy around 6:55 in the morning.
Sustained.
Can you left Bundy at 8:05, approximately?
Yes,
Okay. And from there, you went over to Rockingham, is that right?
that's right.
Now, prior to leaving Bundy, did you have a chance to look around?
Object, Your Honor. This is beyond the scope.
I like to approach and make an offer.
Sustained. Proceed.
You understand the term probable cause, Officer Thompson?
Not an issue, Your Honor. Object. Start.
Let me see at the sidebar with Corporal.
Mr. Cochran has made an issue of the fact that the defendant was handcuffed in 30 seconds or 45 seconds upon his arrival at the house. And he has raised this rush to judgment issue before this jury. This officer, as a member of the LAPD, had he not believed in the propriety of placing this defendant in handcuffs, he could have objected. He didn't have to do it. But he did, and he did it because he had some information about the crime scene at Bundy because he had been there. He knew about the bodies, he knew about the footprints, he saw the blood in the Bronco, he knew about that.
Probable cause is not an issue. His state of mind is not an issue. Van Adder is the one. I specifically elicited. Van Adder is the one who said, hook him up. The fact that the court could ask those questions in 2 or 3 questions, that's very nice, Your Honor. But then Your Honor's no longer in the district attorney's office. That's their job.
There's nothing wrong with what happened with this defendant at 360 Rockingham. And had he not been a celebrity or somebody else, he'd have been arrested and handcuffed less than 30 seconds. And I think the jury should be made aware of that.
He's presumed to be innocent. That's the rule in America when last I looked. So all these statements about he should have been hooked up if he hadn't been arrested, that's preposterous. And the fact that they think Mr. Simpson is guilty has nothing to do with reality. There's the truth, and there's the truth according to them. You gave them 6 months to get everything they wanted to until they finally sat down and said they arrested. Now they want to put on their case during our case. And I cannot count the times that we would approach the bench and you would say, counsel, it's their case. They can put it on any way they want to. And it's our turn now. And so what we do is approach you and ask you to limit certain things. You say we're going to limit them, and now we're wasting time again with another major argument. And the fact that you could do it in three questions, and I apologize if I don't perceive it to be a cheap shot. What he said was, he says, I'm out of drama. I said, yes, after the gloves. Now, that wasn't a cheap shot. That's your interpretation. I didn't think it was.
I thought it was.
Well, it's your court, so if you think it was, then I apologize. But I don't think that's a cheap shot. I was responding to what Mr. Darden said to my colleagues.
Counsel, Mr. Darden and I were discussing a matter, and you piped in with that, which I took to be a cheap shot.
Well, I didn't think it was a cheap shot, but I was talking to Mr. Shapiro. I did not, when you say pipe in, but you hear very well, Your Honor, so I accept that, and I apologize.
Mr. Cochran,
I apologize.
think about that.
I will, Your Honor.
And the record should reflect that we've been rejoined by all the members of our jury panel. All right, officer, why don't you pull the microphone up close? Mr. Cochran.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Thompson, thank you for coming this afternoon. All right, I want you to take a look at this, Officer Thompson. Is that the Bronco you were talking about?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so that lady who has run up to the vehicle with the cap on and a white shirt and pants and tennis shoes, you recognize that lady?
Yes, I do.
And is that the lady that you had been talking with between 10 and 11 on June 13th who'd been asking you a lot of questions?
Yes.
And is this the footage that you saw about a week after June 13th?
Yes, it is.
You believe that lady's with the press, do you?
Yes.
Did you have occasion at all on the date of June 13th to speak with that lady, that particular lady who was appearing in the Bronco?
Prior to that incident, yes, I did talk to her.
What were the circumstances surrounding your conversation with her that morning between 10 and 11?
She continued to ask me questions about various things in the driveway and the Bronco.
And do you know what her occupation was?
I would only assume that she was with the news media.
Once the media shows up, everything changes. Media has probably more people than we do, more resources than we do. You want to get there before the media.
As at the Bundy crime scene, news crews have set up cameras outside the Rockingham gates. They capture video of Simpson's return as well as the comings and goings of the LAPD.
OJ, what can you say about this? Back up, please. Get out of the way. Step back here. You got any comments on that? You don't know anything to say?
Please step back. Please step back.
When you returned to the Rockingham gate, Did you see anything unusual on the hood of the white Ford Bronco?
Yes, I did.
What did you see, sir?
I saw 2 white styrofoam cups.
2 of them?
Yes.
We expect to show that this Bronco, which you heard this important evidence therein, was not secure, that people such as this lady graphically were allowed to walk up, touch it, and when that Bronco left that location, there'll be evidence that there were at least 2 coffee stains on the hood of the particular Bronco, that it wasn't secured. Tell us what happened, sir. Regarding the car.
I went back to the front. I saw 2 styrofoam cups on the hood of the Bronco. I asked my partner about the 2 styrofoam cups. She had made mention to the female photographer. I removed the 2 styrofoam cups, placed it on the curb, and I went to the photographer.
You talked to her?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And after you talked to her, what happened after that?
I gave the cups to her, and I'm assuming that she threw them away.
If you know, were either of those cups ever photographed, if you know?
I don't think so.
By the time it was towed, there was all kinds of rings of coffee where the media was using it as a coffee table.
Had you had an opportunity to see the Bronco prior to the defendant's arrival?
Yes.
Can you fix for us the amount of time that that coffee cup was on the hood of the Bronco?
I don't think it could have been any more than 5 minutes.
Did you consider the hood portion of the Bronco to somehow have some extra significance or importance to the case at all?
I consider the entire Bronco to have significance in the case.
Couldn't you put somebody and station them right by the Bronco and said, don't come and touch this Bronco? Could have done that, couldn't you?
I guess that could have been done, yes.
Could have been done, right?
Yes.
Okay.
When did you want it to be secure? When did you decide for the first time that this vehicle should be secured?
Approximately 5:30 in the morning.
And by secured, you wanted to make sure that no trace evidence could be tampered with regarding that vehicle?
Yes.
So you wanted to cordon off that entire area with tape. Is that correct?
No, I put uniformed police officers on the vehicle to protect the vehicle.
Now, in this situation, the Bronco was parked out on the street, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Did you consider putting up yellow tape around that Bronco?
That was considered momentarily.
But you didn't, did you?
No, I didn't.
And why not?
It would have been extremely difficult to tape off that Bronco because of its position in the street.
What about the Bronco's position made it difficult to tape it off?
There is nothing around the Bronco which would have allowed me to secure tape.
Why not tie the tape around the wall and then tie it around the Bronco and back around to the wall again?
Usually you don't let the crime scene tape touch a part of evidence. And there's really nothing there which would have allowed me to tie crime scene tape to a wall and then tie it to another portion of the wall and keep the Bronco within that portion tied off.
So given the position of the Bronco, then it just wasn't a practical thing to do. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But you had another reason. Is that right?
Yes, I did.
What was that other reason?
I didn't want to draw attention to the Bronco.
As OJ25 continues to unfold, a question central to the defense hangs over this trial. Did the LAPD plant evidence in an effort to frame O.J. Simpson? The jurors will have to answer that question, and the Dream Team is doing everything it can to lead them to believe that's what happened.
Officer Thompson, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next witness.
John Meraz, last name M-E-R-A-Z.
Mr. Carpenter.
Good afternoon, Mr. Raz.
Good afternoon.
I'd like to direct your attention back to the month of June of 1994. At that time, how were you employed, sir?
I was employed by a police impound garage.
By which police impound garage were you employed?
Vertel's Automotive.
You tell the ladies and gentlemen of the jury where you saw this Bronco vehicle, or you first saw it, on June 15th.
I was sent to 150 North San Pedro, which is the print shed.
And is that the print shed for the LAPD?
Yes, it is.
Lon Cryer, juror number 6, kept a detailed journal during the trial.
In the courtroom today, we wrapped up the testimony of the tow truck driver who towed the Bronco from the police print shed to the police garage at Verdel's.
Prior to backing up and pulling out of the print shed, did you have occasion to get inside that vehicle at all to make any kind of adjustments with regard to the steering column, anything of that nature?
Yes, I did.
Demonstrate it for the jurors. Show us how you stepped in at that point, if you can. You may step down from the stand if you need to.
I opened the door. As I opened the door, I put one hand on the steering wheel. And as I put that hand on the steering wheel, I kind of did this, checked the steering so that it was locked. As I came out, I checked the emergency brake, and that was it.
When you were inside that vehicle on that occasion, with your testimony, you didn't see any blood, right?
I didn't see any blood.
Did you see any evidence as though the inside of that vehicle had been printed with any dark print powder at all?
Car was not printed.
And how do you know it wasn't printed?
Well, through the years, I'm familiar with the print that they put on these vehicles. It's either gray or black that's put on these vehicles, and there was none of that on it.
And are you saying there was none of that inside the vehicle?
Inside or around the car.
And you looked, did you?
Yes, I did.
Were you looking carefully for print dust that day?
Yes.
And you didn't see any, correct?
I didn't see any.
You recognize the location that's shown in this photograph, sir? That's the print check, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
And that's where you picked up the Bronco on June the 15th, isn't it?
That's correct.
In fact, that was the position it was in when you hooked it up to your tow truck and pulled it out, correct?
Correct.
Zoom in. What do you see there on the door, Mr. Mraz?
Powder.
Looks like
Print
dust.
powder. Looks like print powder, yes.
All right, you've also testified, sir, that you saw no blood in the Bronco, correct?
Correct.
We're showing you the photograph, People's 529. Tell us if you see any blood.
See blood up on top, 22. Some down there where 23 is.
And you don't recall seeing the blood that you now see in this photograph?
I didn't see that in there.
You see the blood by 31 and 30 there?
Yes, I do.
But you didn't see this blood either?
I didn't see that either.
Do you know when these photographs were taken?
I have no idea.
They were taken on June the 14th, sir, before you got to the Bronco on June the 15th.
He gave some pretty contrasting testimony in regard to him not noticing any blood in the Bronco when he towed it to the garage.
John, the tow truck driver, is a classic witness for this case. He's bad for everybody. He's going back and forth, not really a win for anybody. Then it turns out the tow truck driver actually stole evidence from inside O.J. Simpson's Bronco.
While you're in the vehicle, did you notice any kind of receipts or vouchers at that point at all?
Yes, I did.
Could you describe for the jury what you noticed and where these receipts were?
The door was open, which is the driver's side that I was in. Open the door. There's a side pocket. There's a couple of receipts in there.
What, if anything, did you do with regard to those receipts?
I took them out of the car. I showed them to employees.
All right, now, why'd you take them out of the car?
I guess status, who the man was.
All right, now, meaning Mr. O.J. Simpson?
Yes.
And then what'd you do with them at that point?
I put them in my shirt.
In the course of your conversation with Mr. Jones, did he ask you a question about these vouchers or these receipts?
He asked me about the vouchers, yes.
And what did you tell him, if anything?
I denied it.
That you lied to him?
Yes, I did.
Now, as you stated, sir, when Mr. Jones first confronted you with having taken those receipts from the Bronco, You lied, didn't you?
That's correct.
And you told him you took nothing from the Bronco, didn't you?
That's correct.
But you had.
This is true.
And you put them in your pocket.
That's correct.
And then later on, he asked you to remove the contents of your pocket, didn't he?
He did.
But you refused to empty your pocket for him, didn't you?
That's correct.
When you removed those receipts from the door of the Bronco, you were tampering with evidence, isn't that right?
Correct.
After you were confronted with these statements of other employees, and after you went to the door of the Bronco and saw that the receipts you claimed to have put back were not there, you signed this statement. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right, this is 533 on the Elmo.
Yes, Your Honor. And it says, I, John J. Mraz, took some paper out of OJ's car and put them back in the car on June 17th, 1994, correct?
Correct.
Did your employment status change?
Yes, it did.
And what happened to you?
I was terminated.
You're looking to get some money out of Bertels for what you claim to be your wrongful termination, is that right?
Not necessarily true.
You're not seeking money? You're not seeking money in your wrongful termination suit, are you, Mr. Mraz? Is that it?
If it comes my way, yes. I'll take it.
What is your understanding of stealing, Mr. Mraz?
My opinion of stealing?
Yeah, what do you think stealing is?
If I took something that belonged to you and kept it and not returned it, that's stealing.
All right, and that would be a crime, isn't that right?
Yes.
You took the credit card receipts out of the side pocket of Mr. Simpson's Bronco on June the 15th, isn't that correct?
It's true.
And you did that without his permission, isn't that correct?
Yes.
And you have never been charged with the crime of theft for taking those receipts out of the Bronco, have you?
Correct.
Sir, is it your understanding that Mr. Cochran has expressed no interest in pursuing a prosecution against you for theft?
From the way I was told is that they weren't going to file charges on me, is what I was told.
And when you say they, who are you referring to?
I'm referring to Mr. Cochran.
Next witness.
Mr. Willie Ford.
All right, Mr. Ford.
WILLIEFORD.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ford.
Good afternoon.
And sir, Mr. Ford, what is your occupation, sir?
I'm a photographer for the city of Los Angeles.
In connection with your duties with the Los Angeles Police Department, and specifically as a photographer for the Special Investigations Division, do you have occasion on or about June 13th of 1994 to go to 360 North Rockingham?
Yes, sir.
And what time did you arrive at that location?
According to the crime scene log, it was 3:10.
When you got there, did you encounter and talk with some LAPD detective outside the Rockingham location regarding the reasons why you were there?
Yes, sir.
And which detective did you talk with?
That was Detective Harper.
And did Detective Harper give you some instructions or tell you what he wanted you to do with regard to that location?
Yes.
And what was that?
To videotape the personal property of Mr. Simpson outside, as well as the interior of his home, starting outside first.
You got to Mr. Simpson's bedroom at some point, didn't you?
Yes.
And when you got to his bedroom, you see any socks on the floor at the foot of his bed?
No.
Oh, well.
You didn't see any socks, did you?
No.
All right, you see where it says 6/13/94, that was the date, is that correct?
Yes.
And where it says 2:13 p.m., that should be 3:13 p.m., right?
Yes.
You're now entering, it's about 4:13 p.m. Is this Mr. Simpson's bedroom area?
Yes.
All right. You remember seeing this couch in that room?
Yes.
Remember the fireplace in that room?
Yes.
Now stop right there. Mr. Simpson's bed was to the right, was it not?
Yes.
Everything has its place. Every single thing. It is a detective's dream because anything that is out of place or looks askew is evidence.
See that carpet there, that rug right in front of the bed?
Yes.
Saw that rug that particular day, did you not?
Yes.
Any socks on that rug that day, Mr. Ford?
No.
The sock couldn't have been found in front of OJ's bed on a white rug because videographers had been there. And you see the white rug and there is no black sock.
It was 4:13 p.m. on June 13th, 1994 that you walked through there, right?
Yes.
If there had been socks there, you would have taken photographs of them or video.
Yes.
Mr. Ford, I want you to take a look at that photograph. And first of all, do you recognize that photograph as being Mr. Simpson's bedroom?
Yes, sir.
And do you see in that photograph what appears to be some socks at the foot of that bed?
Yes.
Did you at any time ever see any socks at the foot of Mr. Simpson's bed when you were in that room at about 4:12 or 4:13 on June 13th, 1994?
No, sir.
So you never saw what's depicted in that photograph, right?
Right.
Once the crime scene is compromised, then it makes it impossible to evaluate the integrity of the prosecution's evidence.
In response to Mr. Cochran's questions, you told us about the instructions you were given at the scene.
Yes.
Okay. You were instructed to only videotape a room after it had been searched, is that right?
Objection, Your Honor. Don't forget to say. Objection. Call the question.
Overruled. That's correct.
You were instructed to videotape a room only after it had been processed by the criminalists, correct?
On that question.
Overruled. That was correct.
Approximately what time was item number 12 collected?
That was collected at approximately 4:30.
All right. Now, after collecting item number 12, did you go upstairs in the location?
Yes, I did.
Do you recall what was the next item of evidence that you collected?
The next item was a pair of socks in the master bedroom.
When Dennis Fung testified about collecting the socks, item number 13, he wasn't able to give the exact time he collected them because he failed to write it down. He guessed what the time was based upon when he collected item number 12, the blood drops in the foyer.
The defense will next call Detective Brett Looper. Good afternoon, Detective Looper.
Good afternoon, sir.
Are you aware of whether or not the foyer blood drops, the socks, were picked up sequentially or in order?
No, I'm not aware of it.
Now, your estimate is that Mr. Fung picked these socks up at what time was that now?
About 3:30, 3:45 in that general area in the afternoon.
And do you have that written in any report anywhere?
No, sir, I do not.
The defense was saying that it was planted. Everything was planted. Yeah, sure. All under the same assumption that the killer didn't have a rock-solid alibi, so we're going to plant blood evidence too. Really?
You mentioned during your direct testimony that you saw some socks somewhere in the house.
I did,
right?
yes, sir.
Some socks that you caused to be seized?
Yes, sir, I did.
Did you see those socks before Mr. Ford arrived?
Yes, sir.
Do you recall what time of the day it was that you first saw those socks?
It was between 12:30 and 12:40.
I mean, it was just so much outrageous stuff that they floated and ultimately bought.
Where were those socks, Detective?
Those socks were located at the foot of the bed in plain view.
They were just laying there.
That's correct, yes, sir.
Are you sure of that, Detective?
Positive.
All right, back on the record in the Simpson matter. Jury is not present. Counsel, anything we need to take up before we invite the jurors to join us? All right, Mr. Blazier.
Good morning, Your Honor.
Good morning.
We intend to call Dr. Frederick Reeder as our first EDTA witness. I heard, I think on the television last night, that the prosecution was going to make some sort of a motion to either preclude him or delay him.
I just received notice of this change in developments late last night, and I'm very, I'm really outraged at the manner in which this defense has proceeded. Dr. Reeders, we were informed, would testify at some point, but it was at the end of a series of witnesses who have now been skipped over by counsel. Dr. Reeders was added to the witness list on July 17th. That is this Monday. That is the same day we received his report.
Mr. Blazier, let's cut to the chase. The issue is the turning over of a report 2 days before you're going to call him.
The report was turned over on Monday. There is no legal requirement that Dr. Reeders even write a report. He did not perform any tests. All he did was analyze their data. I feel like I've had a guest come to my house unexpected, stayed 3 weeks uninvited, and then they start complaining about the food.
It's a two-page report, and yet the conclusions are very complex. They're very serious. If Dr. Reeders truly intends to testify to the positions he's adopted in that report, the cross-examination will have to be extensive, and the preparation time needs to be a little more than 2 days before he's called.
We don't have to have a report from Dr. Reeders. We did one, given all the falderall that we've gone through about experts not having reports. They know what these issues are. They know exactly what they are.
They do, but they just got the report. This is a key issue, and it's a highly complex area. And to drop a report a couple of days before you're going to cross-examine an expert, if the shoe were on the other foot, I'd be peeling you off the ceiling right now. All right, the defense may call their next witness.
Your Honor, the defense calls Dr. Frederick Reeders.
All right.
Reeders, R-I-E-D-E-R-S.
Mr. Blazier.
Thank you, Your Honor. What is your occupation?
I'm a forensic toxicologist and director of a toxicology laboratory.
Now, you had experience in your background working with EDTA.
Great deal, yes.
And approximately when did you do your first work with EDTA?
In the early 50s.
I think you testified on direct that blood that is collected in a vacutainer has a preservative in it called EDTA, correct?
In this particular tube, yes.
And that is a chemical that's put in there to keep the blood from coagulating, correct?
It's my understanding, yes.
And hypothetically, if there was the chemical EDTA found in the blood on the socks, would your answer be the same, that that would indicate that it may have come from a reference file?
We would also have to assume or make the assumption that there's no other source of EDTA that could have gotten on those socks. Then yes, I'd agree.
Did Agent Martz of the FBI test an area of the sock that did not have any apparent blood on it?
Yes, that's what he states he did.
Did that indicate the presence of EDTA?
No, it did not.
And what does that tell you about the blood stain?
Well, that means, since it is my opinion that the blood stain contained EDTA, that came from the blood and not from the sock.
Does that rule out any contribution from laundry detergent or something else that might be throughout the entire sock?
Reasonably, certainly, yes.
This is a huge moment for the defense. Dr. Reeders testifies that there's EDTA on the sock in the blood. Basically what this means is that the defense is telling the jury through this expert that this blood was planted, and it goes to this reoccurring theme that this was a botched investigation, and more importantly, that it was sinister.
You indicated that you could not identify any compound at any time to the exclusion of all others. Is that correct?
In my opinion, nobody can, and I certainly can't. I'd like to meet the one who can.
And you indicated that in order to do that, it requires faith. Is that what you just said?
Well, you can say you did, and that's an article of faith, but it's not an article of science, because you can only exclude it if you compare it with all other compounds in existence, which includes the ones we don't even know of. So it's absurd.
And so you have testified in this case that although you cannot say that the substance found in the sock are EDTA from preserved blood to the exclusion of all other compounds, you have indicated that in order to say that, it would be an act of faith, correct?
Of course I can. Nobody can.
I have a report to show you, sir. Tell the jury what this means in terms of amount, sir. EDTA should not exceed 2 milligrams per milliliter of blood. What does that translate to in terms of either parts per million or parts per billion?
What that is, it should not be less than 2,000 parts per million. That's the same amount that you find in EDTA blood. At 2,000 parts per million EDTA in blood, the blood won't clot. People would bleed to death all over the place. It's absurd.
It's absurd. This is the basis for the EPA report that you referred to, sir. This absurd thing here. Let me show you.
I beg your pardon.
Wait. Is that a question, Ms. Clark?
It was foundational to a question. I wanted to show you the report.
Be careful, Ms. Clark.
Is EDTA appear or allowed to be present in food?
In food, yes.
What kinds of foods is it allowed to be in?
In some of the dried vegetable type things, like in peas and beans, according to the one FDA release that I have, in pickles, in a variety of foods.
All right, so people can potentially be eating EDTA every day.
Probably they are, and I know they have been for many years. I thought it was taken out of the food for some reason. I haven't followed that story, but that was my impression from what I saw in one of the National Library of Medicine publications.
Do you have an opinion on whether the EDTA found in the sock could have come from food?
From food eaten by the person whose blood it is
Yes.
that it? No. In my opinion, that is so unlikely that I wouldn't even consider it.
The sock didn't strengthen their case as the prosecution believed it would. It not only weakened the case, it mortally weakened the case.
Trial of the century has now been underway for 27 weeks. Both sides hammering away at each other, trying to prove their case. Coming up, the defense continues to challenge the physical evidence and to underscore their three themes: sloppy police work, crime scene contamination, and a frame-up. That's next on OJ25. I'm Roger Cossack.